topic that's really dominating politics at the moment, of course, Britain's membership of the EU and the coming referendum on whether we stay in or whether we leave. Now, this week, Andrew Bridgen, the Prime Minister, was outlining the details of some deal that he wants to put forward. But it's probably fair to say that he's not really going to change your mind on this, is he?
No, but I think the Prime Minister is going to try and drag another dead rabbit from the hat and tell us it's a live tiger before the 18th, 19th, when I think a deal will be announced. But I honestly, it's a bit like screenplay sword fighting. I think it's all choreographed who's going to win and what we're going to get. And then we can get on with campaign. What's it going to be then? What's the result going to be? I think the Prime Minister will come back saying that we've got some sort of associate membership. But I mean, that doesn't mean anything. Basically, we still won't be a sovereign Parliament, and it won't change the idea, but he will swing a few voters over to the Remain. Analogies of tigers you've just mentioned now, but you also compared the Prime Minister's negotiations on Europe as rearranging deck chairs when we should be getting in the lifeboats. A bit dramatic, isn't it? Well, no, I think the European Union are desperate for us to get on and have this referendum. The fact is that Greece needs another bailout, and with the migrant crisis as well, I think we're going to see this summer that in return for extra money that the Greeks need, Germany are going to demand a sealing of their land borders, and effectively you're going to see, because of the migrant crisis, Greece turned into an open migrant camp, which is going to be devastating for their tourist industry, and it's devastating that the European Union would do that to one of its member states. But obviously that will be after the referendum. That's Andrew's view, of course, but Chris, we hear all the arguments in or out, but is there a reason why the East Midlands in particular should stay in?
Oh, there's a lot of reasons, and I think actually people have to wake up and realise that, yeah, it might not be the topic of conversation, on everybody's lips, but there's a strong economic case for us engaging with the wider world. This notion that you can just pull up the drawbridge, stick your fingers in your ears, and all the world's problems go away. We have got to engage with the wider world, both for jobs, for businesses, but also because engaging and cooperating, trying to shape these world events is in our own best interest. And Andrew's got to start saying what sort of world we would live in if we leave, because it's a very, I think people need to wake up and realise it could be potentially very, very scary indeed. We'll be able to have our own free trade deals with the United States of America, with China, with India. Well, I was out in America a couple of years ago and they said if it was just UK, USA doing the deal, we'd have done a deal several years ago. Take the plunge. Well, Chris, I mean, not all of your Labour colleagues are quite so warm to the European project. Bassett Law's John Mann wasn't impressed by the Prime Minister's negotiations.
Mr. Speaker, is that it? Is it the best the Prime Minister can do? Nothing for British pensioners, nothing for British workers, and as the Office for Budget Responsibility and the Treasury have both confirmed, his long-term economic plan is reliant on over 1 million new migrants entering this country before 2020.
So, Chris, some big differences in the Labour ranks on this one. Oh,
there's lots of people with different opinions. I personally think that the case for staying as at the centre of the European Union is far broader than just David Cameron's negotiations. I mean, some people are so anti-European Union that no matter what the Prime Minister came back with, they'd still throw it back in his face. I just think that when you think of the jobs, when you think of the economy, but when you also think of the principles of cooperation and engagement, that's why it's better to stay as part of the European Union. I was Business for Sterling the No campaign some 15, 16 years ago, campaigned to keep us out of the euro, and I remember people like Chris campaigning that we, if we didn't join the euro, business would collapse, inward investment would collapse, and they're making all the same arguments now, and they're equally wrong.
It's going to run and run, this one, isn't it? Definitely. Now, teachers in the East Midlands say they're facing a recruitment crisis with a shortage of suitably qualified staff, making it difficult to fill vacancies. But the government insists there's no crisis. It says staff turnover in schools is low and the number of teachers returning to the profession is rising. Our political editor Tony Roe has been taking a look at this issue.
Crisis? What crisis? It's the phrase assigned to Labour Prime Minister Jim Callaghan, who denied chaos in the economy. Now there is government denial that there is a crisis in the recruitment of teachers. This is Genogly City Academy in Nottingham, an inner-city school where they're learning about pressure. The pressure's on the head teacher, who, unusually for a head, is having to take the lesson. He's finding it difficult to get teachers of quality and experience.
An introduction to that concept of pressure. You can put national adverts out at great expense and get no applicants. And that's the same experience whether the school is a good school in a good area, as well as schools in more challenging circumstances.
The government, he says, could do more to help with recruitment to a great profession.
All of the positive things that happen in schools, nobody hears about. So I think what we've got to do is make that profession more attractive. We need to attract more high quality people into teaching who want to come in for the right reasons.
Over in rural Derbyshire, this is the village of Findon. Here, there is more evidence of a problem finding the right teachers.
When we've wanted more experienced teachers, that's where we've struggled particularly. Recently, we advertised a post in the national press, in the TES, and we asked people to come and have a look at our lovely school. I know we're biased, but we think it's a great school to work in, with very few challenges, strangely. And we had nobody come to look round, nobody applied for the position, and eventually when we re-advertised, we had one person apply for the position, and governors were in a position where they either appointed that person or appointed nobody to teach a class. And so that's a position that clearly cannot continue. We need to have good quality candidates to actually have choice from.
The government says to talk of a crisis in teacher supply is disingenuous and misleading. It even says it's scaremongering, and that 90% of teachers stay in the profession from 1 year to the next, far lower than other industries. It says the number of teachers returning to the classroom rises year after year.
It's more retention of teachers, and after a few years we're finding that not just here but in other schools as well, that there are teachers that after a few years really become quite despondent with perhaps the workload and different pressures of accountability, and that's where the problems start to occur.
At a recent meeting between a group of East Midlands primary school head teachers and the Education Secretary Nicky Morgan, she told them there was no crisis in teacher recruitment. There was instead a challenge. That's the government mantra, no crisis. I understand the head teachers reacted with hollow laughter. We've been told the problem is the numbers disillusioned leaving the profession within the first 5 years, fed up with what Labour call government diktat on the curriculum.
Well, Andrew Bridgen, the government has clearly denied that there is a crisis in recruiting teachers, and yet we hear 5 different unions and head teachers like David Hooker saying that there is a real problem. Why isn't the government listening to them? Well,
the government have accused some of the unions of scaremongering. I think there is a shortage of specialist teachers. The government having to offer incentives up to £30,000 to get good quality physics teachers. There's a shortage in some of the STEM subjects, and there's huge incentives to get people into teaching. But what we're also suffering is, the government's a victim of its own success. There are, the way the economy has been growing, there's a lot more job opportunities out there for graduates and people leaving school, and then teaching has to compete with that. So they've got to be minded that they've got to make the incentives right to get the right people in. Every pupil does need gifted teachers, and we all know what an impact that can have on your education.
It's all about recruiting quality teachers here, isn't it?
It is.
Nicky Morgan, the Education Secretary, said last week that
we need more people to come in from who've experience in business and industry and bring those skills into
with different
schools.
life experiences.
Absolutely.
And Nicky Morgan, the Education Secretary, did say last week that schools in the northwest of the country are struggling to attract and retain teachers, yet they have twice as many trainee teachers as we do here. So if they're struggling, so are we here in the East Midlands.
I'm not hearing it so much in Leicestershire, and what's going to be really good for Leicestershire next year is that we're going to get fairer school funding. We've been the second lowest funded per pupil in education in Leicestershire for a very long time. Every year, £500 per pupil in a classroom, less than Leicester City, and an amazing £1,000 per pupil, less than every pupil in Birmingham. Well, fairer funding is going to mean that schools in Leicestershire next year will be able to recruit more experienced and more expensive teachers.
So, Chris Leslie, the government is doing a lot, according to Andrew Bridgen.
Well, I'm surprised Andrew's not hearing it. I mean, I speak to head teachers every week, and I've heard this time and again. The head teacher you had in your package, David Hooker at Genogley Academy, in my constituency. I know maybe this is particularly actually an issue in the cities especially, but getting those good quality teachers so that they are recruited, so that they recognise this is a rewarding, fantastic career. It's so important. It's not actually a party political issue. I raised it in the Commons with the Education Minister recently. Head teachers shouldn't be spending tens of thousands of pounds advertising in these big, expensive national journals. The Department for Education, maybe they should set up
they already have a website.
Maybe they should set up these free systems so that they can advertise, get that money into the front line instead. We also need to get, I think, some of the higher education institutions, the universities, getting those graduates to then go into the schools, making sure that we see that as a route properly into new recruitment, because it is a rewarding profession to go into.
But having to advertise and pay out £1,500,
yes.
I mean,
ridiculous.
Why don't you do something to help them on that?
Well, the Department of Education tell me there is a free website where they should be advertising their posts on there and save on those recruitment costs. But I think Chris is quite right. I think we've also got to offer inducements to ensure that gifted teachers go to schools that are struggling, where they've got a choice. A gifted teacher can go anywhere they want to in the country. They've got to have inducements to go to the schools that really need them. So we
really need them here, though, in the East Midlands, don't we, Andrew? Because every kind of measure...
All schools need gifted teachers.
Of course, but we're talking about the East Midlands, aren't we? And we have particular problems with education in the East Midlands. We are at the bottom or near the bottom for results or attainment across the East Midlands. This is a wider issue, really, isn't it, about the state of education in our schools?
Yes, and I think fairer funding for Leicestershire is certainly going to make a huge difference to our ability. I go to schools in Leicestershire where because of the funding constraints, they can't have experienced teachers, but experienced teachers are more expensive. That's not really fair.
I think when I've been talking to head teachers, they say some possible new recruits into teaching, because they go back to live at home after they've graduated because of expensive student debts and so forth, that's actually deterring them moving into locations where we really need those teachers to be recruited. There is a problem here, and I think
particularly in Nottingham.
Exactly, there is. Well, 1 in 6 of our teachers are recruited from abroad these days. So they're casting the net very wide. But we've got to do much more to help get these schools into that excellence zone, help and listen to the head teachers. I think that the ministers in particular need to start thinking out of the box. What can they do to help with this recruitment crisis?
We need more incentives, like paying off the student loans of particular subjects where we're short of gifted teachers.
Are we attracting the wrong kind of people?
Well, I think it's that the profession sometimes has had a bad name. Is it going to have a heavy workload? Of course, there are issues to do with that. But actually, it is a wonderful job to go into, working with children, particularly when you think of all the improvements that can be made. I think a lot of the head teachers are wanting to do more to make this a rewarding career, and we've got to be very much more positive about the profession of teaching.
OK, thank you. Well, it looks like the devolution deal that would transfer many powers from Westminster to the East Midlands is stalling. There are 2 bids from the region sitting on the Chancellor's desk, but no sign of movement. Our political reporters from Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire and Leicestershire have followed every turn in this saga, so we brought them all together for an East Midlands summit to find out what's happening.
It's the point where my county, Derbyshire, meets my patch, Nottinghamshire, and the perfect spot for a devolution summit under our county's flags.
So this is probably where our 2 counties meet, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're about 20 yards into Derbyshire here. Yeah. Leicestershire's over there, Nottinghamshire's over there, and this is just about Derbyshire.
Almost neutral territory, or as close as it comes anyway.
Absolutely.
Maybe they should build a big sort of combined authority headquarters right on the spot.
Our 2 sides have come together to thrash out a deal which will involve one large authority and a joint mayor.
So you've got 19 local authorities across a huge area, and the leaders of the councils all seem to want it. But I spoke to the leader of Nottingham City Council, for example, the other day, who said there's now a chance of less than 50-50 of it actually happening.
I mean, Derbyshire County Council really want devolution. They like the idea of the power that will come with it. Derby City Council need devolution. They see it as a potential financial bailout. But the smaller districts and boroughs of Derbyshire, they're really nervous. They think that if you have a combined authority and elected mayor, maybe those councils just won't be needed anymore.
And there's another problem. Westminster politicians.
Supposedly, some of them, especially on my side of the border, are pretty unhappy about the whole thing.
Yeah, and according to John Collins, has been sort of dripping in the ears of people in Westminster saying, you shouldn't let this happen, it's not a good idea.
Yeah, they don't like the idea of that elected mayor having more power than any of they ever will.
Of course, we've left a big part of the East Midlands out of this discussion.
I'm flying the flag for Leicestershire, and the warm welcome on the other bank of the river reflects how keen our neighbours have been just lately to get us to join them. But we're going it alone.
Hey, come on, don't forget Leicester and Leicestershire and all this.
Well, where have you been?
Well, we've been developing our own devolution plans of our own, really. Remember, we've got the Labour-controlled city, we've got a Liberal Democrat borough, and all the other districts in Leicestershire trying to, see eye to eye so we can get our own devolution plan put together.
So, all the deals on the table, what happens next?
There's not an awful lot stopping the North Midlands and the Treasury coming to a deal, but once that deal's been done, it's got to go back to the councils, and some of them in Derbyshire I can see voting against the devolution deal, so they could scupper the whole thing still.
I think now the ball is very much in the government's court, but I think the longer this goes on, the more those voices of dissent are going to grow.
Across the river, things are looking a little differently. We look in a slightly different direction, and I think they want to try and see whether their own plans will work first before looking at other options, which might include joining Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire.
Time for us to go our separate ways. And after all of the debate in the East Midlands, whatever happens next won't actually be decided on the banks of the Trent, but alongside another river, the Thames, at Westminster.
And on that bombshell, there's always more than a touch of Top Gear when those three get together. Andrew, Richard, sorry about that rubbish impersonation. It seems pretty obvious, though, that we're now waiting to hear from Westminster on this, on whether these devolution deals are going to go ahead. But it's all gone very quiet. So what's going on?
I don't know. I actually supported the
you
three.
Don't know.
I thought it's above my pay grade, but I supported the three counties deal. I wanted Leicester, Leicestershire, Derby and Derbyshire, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire and Rutland all to come in together and have a combined East Midlands main bid. I've now reluctantly had to back the Leicester and Rutland bid, and now I'm told that it's likely that South Derbyshire and Rushcliffe are going to flake off and come to us on some sort of associate basis. It just seems to be going very political when we should all be actually looking at the economic growth across the whole area.
But is that what's stopping it? Because some people like you want different deals to other people.
No, I just think it is a natural fit that we should have the three counties together, and I still think that's a possibility that George Osborne through Greg Clark will come back and say, look at going together. I'm not sure that Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland are a big enough entity on their own to get enough meaningful power, and we're not an island. I'm right in the middle of what would be the Golden Triangle. A lot of the D2N2 growth in their proposal is actually in my seat, which wouldn't even be in their area. So, how's that supposed to work?
You've got a lot to gain and a lot to lose on this. Well, Chris Leslie, are MPs worried that devolved powers in the region will actually weaken the power of Parliament and of MPs like yourselves?
I don't think it's that. Actually, we should all be in favour of devolution. If the government were serious about it, I think they'd probably find a way of overcoming some of these egos, which are all sort of, don't put it in this shape, or this jigsaw doesn't quite work. We've just got to get past this. Other great parts of the country, the Greater Manchester, London, of course, they don't mess around with this. Scotland, Wales, they get on with it. They're given the devolution, whereas we're sort of missing out here. So I just think we've got to get a grip, find a way of cracking through some of these, little border wrinkles, and recognise that as a region, we are missing out on some very big things, on road investment, on rail infrastructure. We've got some of the lowest investment of anywhere in the country,
so, Andrew,
and we're missing out.
Would you be talking about Conservatives joining with areas like Rushcliffe, for example, on things?
Well, that's just what I've heard might happen. But I come back to the point that you've got three great cities in the East Midlands. We've got three great counties in the middle of the East Midlands, and I think that between those three cities, we should have a three cities bid, a three counties bid. That is the natural fit for me. I wouldn't be surprised if we weren't pushed in that direction. That may be why the bids have stalled at the moment.
I'm more interested, actually. In doing what we can on a cross-party basis for, banging the drum for the East Midlands more broadly. We've set up recently an all-party parliamentary group on the East Midlands. I'm going to be co-chairing it with Chris Heaton-Harris.
It's quite successful.
We're going to go through exactly what are we going to do, what do we need, what are the problems we've got, where do we specialise and do well, and just start to be a bit louder in Whitehall and demanding, and start to actually say we need that investment here.
You're talking the talk, but there's still all this delay and stalling.
This is the classic example between ministers.
What you think and what you're saying here in the studio.
And ironically, as members of Parliament across the parties, we're probably quite agreed at the frustration with both Whitehall and also, to be frank, some of the local government community who need to, I think, put aside some of these small local differences and look at the bigger picture.
But you're asking a lot of vested interests in district councils to want to work together, and obviously there's a lot of councils in these areas.
We have to speak up for the East Midlands to get the job
done. We're here almost talking as one.
Note of unity, which is why we set up.
I'm shocked.
On that bombshell.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So when do you think we might hear more on this?
Well, we've got the all-party group going. We're meeting again in a few weeks' time to start to really prioritise what are the 5 areas we want to push for on actual policy, whether it's transport, health, what's going on in schools and recruitment. Let's get into some of the real issues now, because this constitutional merry-go-round could go on and on and on.
Okay. Well, you can